Hello, faithful, and welcome to the 49ers Plus podcast. I'm Al Moriello, and this is your source for the most objective 49ers discussion and analysis. And today we're going to be discussing Robert Saleh returning as the defensive coordinator, if he is a flight risk to leave after only a year coming back, what Saleh brings to the defense and the organization. People, are already linking Saleh to some former Jets who are going to be upcoming free agents. I'm going to give a current breakdown of the defensive side of the ball, position by position, and we'll touch upon where some needs are and some of the pieces that Saleh has to work with. And lastly, special teams has been revamped. Former Jets defensive coordinator Brant Boyer now takes over. We're going to discuss his experience, rankings with the Jets, and what we could potentially expect there. So let's jump right into it. I apologize ahead of time for any coughing, just trying to shake a cold. So you may hear a little bit of that during the podcast, but let's get right into Robert Saleh returning as DC. And I'm glad I was wrong. I'm on record saying that I didn't think Saleh was going to return, that Saleh would think that it's a step backwards in his career, that he would want to potentially spread his wings elsewhere as a head coach, or at the very least, a defensive coordinator, and not have it seem like he's running back under the wing of Kyle Shanahan. But Saleh interviewed to be the head coach of the Jaguars, the Cowboys, and the Raiders. Let's start with Jacksonville. They fired their GM, Trent Baalke, who was the GM of the 49ers in the early 2010s and late 2000s. When that happened, Tampa Bay pivoted back, or I should say Tampa Bay offensive coordinator Liam Cohen pivoted back and took the Jacksonville head coaching position. If you haven't seen the introductory press conference where he says Duval, the city that Jacksonville or the area Jacksonville is near, it's all sorts of awkward. And he actually looks like, in some ways, a little boy with, his daddy's clothes on. Doesn't mean he's not a great offensive mind. He helped the Tampa Bay offense and Baker Mayfield have a fantastic year this past season. So Liam Cohen in Jacksonville. Las Vegas, the Raiders went with Pete Carroll, which was a good decision. He signed for 3 years. He's 72 years old, 73 years old. He will help right the ship. He will get the culture right. He will leave Las Vegas better than he found it, which is borderline impossible to do the reverse since they are such a poverty franchise now. And the Cowboys, a couple days ago, went with offensive coordinator Brian Schottenheimer after interviewing Saleh, after, I guess, flirting, or people thought they were flirting with Deion Sanders. Schottenheimer elevated from the offensive coordinator position, even though the former head coach Mike McCarthy was really the one calling the plays. And if you haven't seen the introductory press conference for Brian Schottenheimer, sitting between Stephen Jones and Jerry Jones, Stephen being Jerry Jones' son, it's over an hour. Watch it because of how uncomfortable it is whenever Stephen Jones or Jerry Jones speaks. You could just fast forward anytime Brian Schottenheimer is speaking. Jerry Jones gets peppered with, why is this the right hire? Why is Brian Schottenheimer the right hire for this team? And he basically never answers the question. It's uncomfortable. He calls Brian Schottenheimer a risk right to his face. He claims to, this is a hire of me getting out of my comfort zone. No, it's not. It's a hire that leaves Jerry Jones in the spotlight. We all know that, right? He's the one that speaks to the media after the game. He has weekly talk show spots. He wants to be the center of attention. He's not going to have someone upstage him, which is why I never thought Deion Sanders was a possibility, or really any coach that was worth his salt was going to want to deal with the meddling or the spotlight, unless you're a coach that's, a brilliant coach, but an introvert. You want to let, Jerry Jones take all that heat. Go ahead. But if it's on YouTube, just search Dallas Cowboys. Their YouTube channel comes up and you can watch an absolute train wreck. The only team in the NFL that still does not have a head coach hired is the Saints. Robert Saleh did not even interview for that. Mike McCarthy did not want to interview for that position. The organization is a complete mess, but it seems like, Eagles offensive coordinator Kellen Moore is the leader in the clubhouse, and once the Super Bowl is over, he'll be announced the head coach. So let's bring it back to Saleh. Glad I was wrong. Matt Mayoko, one of, if not the most respected and fair and balanced beat reporter that the 49ers have, says that the Niners were getting worried when Saleh was still available. They didn't know what was going to happen with Jacksonville. They didn't know what the Trent Baalke firing in Jacksonville meant for Saleh, if it made it more appealing for him or if that was the reason why Baalke got fired, but it was a Liam Cohn acquisition tactic all along. And Matt Mayoko did come out and say the Niners' second, third, and fourth choices were already scooped up, and that's why they were getting nervous. They thought very highly of Jeff Ulbrich and Dennis Allen. Ulbrich to Atlanta, Dennis Allen to Chicago. So Saleh and Shanahan being really close. I guess they had a handshake agreement that, I will definitely come back unless there's a head coaching position open. They're lucky this time it worked out. And Lynch and Shanahan at their end of the season press conference said they're getting a jump on the head coach and the coordinator search versus being in the playoffs and in the Super Bowl last year. They fired Wilkes, I guess it was mid-January or a couple days after the Super Bowl, and there were slim pickings left, and that's why they ultimately went with Nick Sorensen, who lasted a year, fired, and is now the special teams coordinator in Dallas. Only a year or two of special teams coordinator head coach experience when he was with Jacksonville. This to me is as much gathering intel on San Francisco as it is finding a quality special teams coordinator, for the same reason why the Cowboys traded for Trey Lance, traded a 4th round draft pick for Trey Lance to get intel on the Niners. Has not worked. Dallas hasn't beaten San Francisco in a handful of years anyway. It hasn't been since either 2017 or 18 since Shanahan's been there. So Kyle and John push their chips to the center of the table. Nobody calls their bluff. And Saleh comes back. But here's the issue for me, guys. Like, is he a flight risk? Is Saleh going to be a one and done defensive coordinator, putting his hat in the ring next coaching cycle? I don't, but there's nothing that Saleh could say to promise Shanahan, like, I want to be here, to see it through. And if it means that 1 year of Robert Saleh gets the Niners a Super Bowl, then I guess we would all take it, right? But as I said in my last podcast, Saleh coming back helps the Niners win a Super Bowl, and they bring in a defensive coordinator in 2026, and the team is an absolute mess defensively. That Super Bowl will be long gone and forgotten by week 6 or 7. So this is still a risky move, maybe not as risky as the Cowboys hiring Brian Schottenheimer as their head coach. And that was the owner coming out, sitting next to him, saying this is a risky move. But think about the teams next year that may be in the hunt for coach. This year it was what? I don't have the number off the top of my head, but maybe around 6 new head coach openings. And that's about right. Maybe a fifth of the league every year is going to have head coaching openings. But I just went through the teams to see, if coming off of another down year, or in some cases, maybe not making the playoffs or a championship game or a Super Bowl, teams that can be in the market for a head coach. The Bills, with Sean McDermott, losing another heartbreaker to the Chiefs. If they stumble, take a step back, don't get as far next year, do they look to make a change? Miami, coming off of a losing season, do they look to move on from Mike McDaniel? In the North, in the AFC, the Bengals, the Browns, the Steelers, Pittsburgh made the playoffs. They've been over 500 for every year of Mike Tomlin's tenure, but they're not going anywhere. And I think they only signed him to a 2-year extension, 2025 being the first year of that extension. But the Bengals always underperforming. The Browns are a complete mess. So are those three head coaches on the hot seat next year? Indianapolis and Tennessee in the AFC South. I mean, these are just, go nowhere teams. Would they look to move off their head coaches if each team again misses the playoffs? They probably should, but maybe performs even worse than they did this past year. Will Anthony Richardson in Indianapolis take the next step? Will the Titans draft a quarterback with one of their, top 3 pick that they have, top 2 pick that they have? In the NFC, the Giants, right? Whatever the Giants do, excuse me, drafting a quarterback or not, they're going to be a bad team. And this is Joe Shane and their head coach as dead men walking. They're not going to get time with a rookie quarterback, right? I mean, look at, the Bears. Every time they drafted a quarterback, it was Mitch Trubisky, Caleb Williams, someone else in there. Drafted a quarterback. Next year, they were fired. Brian Daboll is not going to have time unless the Giants show some sort of improvement over what they put out on the field this year. And we haven't had the draft or free agency yet to know what that team's going to look like. But there's a really good chance it's going to look similar to what they put out on the field this year. So the Giants could be an opening. In the NFC South, the Falcons and the Panthers. And in the NFC West, the Cardinals, if they again have another season without making the playoffs, and the Rams if Sean McVay retires. McVay's future seems to be tied to Matthew Stafford's. And I know that McVay came out and said that he would like some clarity on the quarterback position for 2025. There's no guarantee Stafford plays beyond. There's no guarantee Stafford plays in 2025. There's no guarantee he plays beyond 2025. So the Rams could be open. So that's, let me count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that's 12 potential openings. You want to be conservative, maybe 6 to 8. There's no comp pick for Robert Saleh unless he stays 2 years. So you don't get those multiple third-round picks, if anyone's wondering. And there is still some question if the Niners would be eligible if Saleh stays 2 years and leaves after the second year, because Robert Saleh has been a head coach already. But based on what I've read, it looks like that is okay. The fact that Saleh's been a head coach already and becomes a head coach again, it seems like that would still net the Niners 2 third-round picks if Saleh stays through 2026. Now, what does he bring? And we all know it. It's the energy. It's the fiery nature on the sidelines. It's what they've been lacking since DeMeco Ryans left in 2022. It's a shame in a way that alpha males, uber competitive human beings that are getting paid to play a sport and are passionate about their jobs, their responsibilities, winning a championship, needs someone like a Saleh, or potentially needs someone like Saleh or Dre Greenlaw out there to get the juice flowing, to get the blood pumping, to help elevate the pieces on the defense to become greater. The whole should be greater than the sum of its parts. If you've been listening to the podcast, you know I've been saying this repeatedly, but that's the case. We're going to go over the roster. And this is not a talent-bereft roster. Do they have holes? Yes. Could they use some upgrades and depth in certain positions? Absolutely. But we cannot say going into 2025, before free agency and before the draft, that this team does not have talent on defense. They wildly underperformed this past year, just like the entire team did, even though injuries hit, much like it did in 2020. And my concern is with Kyle and with this team, when injuries hit, why does it go so badly? It goes so south. You saw the Lions get hit with the injury bug. To some starters and a lot of backups on defense, still went 15-2. Didn't get hit on offense, really. They still had Goff and Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta, Jamison Williams, Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery for 3 quarters to the season, Penei Sewell on the offensive line. There are teams that can weather injuries better than the Niners can. And the Niners are going to get banged up. Every team gets banged up. It's such a violent sport. Even if there's half the number of injuries, it shouldn't take as drastic a toll record-wise as it did. This team should have been an 8 or 9 win team this year. They still would have missed the playoffs, but they should have been 8-9 or 9-8. Same as the COVID year, right? Salah's got the pieces. Salah has a lot of pieces to work with, and they need to do some work bringing in some new talent and depth as well, but it's scheme consistency, right? They're probably still going to run the wide 9. They're going to run the cover 3. Salah will bring obviously more experience than Nick Sorensen. He was a DC for 4 years before leaving to be the Jets head coach. And under his tenure, the Jets defense was generally a top 7-ish unit. They fell off completely this year after Salah was fired, from being a top 10 unit to a bottom 3rd unit in the league under Jeff Ulbrich, who was splitting his time as the head coach and still calling the plays. They should be more aggressive. They can't get less aggressive, right? They can't get less aggressive. Salah is not going to be a blitzer the way that Aaron Glenn was in Detroit, or the way the Vikings employ blitzes basically like a third or more of the time that they're coming after people. But the Niners will not be as predictable. Being a head coach for 4 years, great experience, obviously leading people, a defensive-minded team in the Jets that he went to, and he brought his philosophy, right, and his defense that he wanted to play, and brought some players with him that he coached before, and we're going to get to that, momentarily. But he hasn't called plays for 4 years. Is this a concern? Should it be a concern? He hasn't forgotten how to call plays. He hasn't forgotten defensive schemes, but he also hasn't been in the minutia, in the groove of calling plays the way at least a Jeff Ulbrich has been. And someone like a Dennis Allen, a Matt Eberflus, other candidates that I thought would have been strong DC candidates for the Niners. Between Allen and Eberflus, they were head coaches for the past couple of years, so they weren't in the nitty-gritty of calling plays as well. So maybe it's not, and I don't really view it as a concern. It's a fact, right? He hasn't been calling the plays for 4 years. It's a fact. We'll see if there is any learning curve or relearning curve for Salah, but that, again, and I've said this previously with any DC, that should be ironed out in training camp, in joint practices, in the preseason, in the first couple weeks of the regular season. People have brought up, he's coming back to San Francisco, so there's roster familiarity. There's actually not. When he left in 2020, the only 2 players currently signed for 2025 and beyond on the roster whom Robert Saleh coached in 2020 before he left are Fred Warner and Nick Bosa. Everybody else is new. And he's going to have a hand or a say or a voice, at the very least a voice, hopefully a say as well, in terms of defensive players in free agency, defensive players in the draft, who he would recommend keeping when it comes to the 53-man roster and roster cutdowns come beginning of September before the season starts. And it started already in terms of linking Salah to some players that are free agents on the Jets. And the one that you may have seen most prominently on social media, cornerback DJ Reed is a free agent, and everyone's saying, bring DJ Reed back to San Francisco. If you'll remember, the Niners drafted him out of Kansas State, released him a few years into his tenure with it was either a shoulder injury or a torn pec, something in that area, thinking that because he was going to be done for half the season, that no one would claim him and they would put him on IR. Instead, the Seahawks claimed him, had a good year or 2 in Seattle. I forget how long he was there, signed with the Jets, and has been a very formidable tandem with himself and Sauce Gardner the past, I think, 3 years in New York. But DJ Reed is not coming back, guys. What DJ Reed is going to get on the open market is going to be comparable, maybe a little less because he's older than Demo, but close to what Demo got. And Demo got about $15 million a year. They are not going to put that much money in the cornerback position. On top of the fact that Charvarius Ward, who's a free agent and will not be coming back, he has a void year cap hit for 2025 of $12 million. So you have to account in terms of roster structure and roster cap management by position. You have Demo making $15 million, whatever Renardo Green is making, Darrell Luter, and others, we're going to get into that. And Charvarius Ward, who's not on the roster, counting a little over $12 million on the cap. Nothing the Niners can do about that. DJ Reed is not coming back to San Francisco. The other two that have been mentioned, defensive tackles Javon Kinlaw and Solomon Thomas. Solomon Thomas, a number 3 pick in the first round. Kylan John's first year out of Stanford, was viewed as a safe pick that had a high floor, never realized his potential. And Javon Kinlaw in San Francisco was dealing with knee issues for his entire tenure, had an ACL reconstruction going into his last year, and played better, was healthier. I would stay away from both of them, but it could be reasonable to bring one in very cheap if they're going to come very cheap. If a market doesn't develop for either of them, I would not be opposed to one. Certainly not both, but I would probably feel best with neither. And remember, this past year, we're talking about 2 D tackles, right? The Jets' run defense was worse than San Francisco's. Jets' run D got shredded, especially the second half of the season when Robert Saleh was gone. But this is a run D that also had Quinn Williams at D tackle. So that's Williams and other players that Kinlaw and Solomon Thomas could have, teamed up with to stop the run. And it maybe wasn't as much personnel as scheme, or again, Jeff Ulbrich being spread too thin, but I am not eager for a reunion with either Kinlaw or Thomas unless the price is not even the price is right. The price is ridiculously favorable for San Francisco. Now let's look at the Niners roster on defense anyway. Players that are basically signed for 2025. Funny enough, defensive ends have the most players under contract. And I guess that is partially representative of how the pass rush was not nearly what any of us, I'm sure, including the staff, the coaching staff, and Lynch and Kyle Shanahan, thought it was going to be. But signed under contract for 2025, Nick Bosa, Leonard Floyd, Yetur Gross-Matos, Robert Beal, Drake Jackson coming off of his patellar tendon surgery or extended time that needs to recover, Jonathan Garvin, Taron Jackson, someone that they picked up end of the season or after the season ended. And then you have Alex Barrett and Sam Okiwanu as exclusive right free agents, which means if the Niners tender them an offer, it's going to be that minimum for however long that they've been in the league. They have to sign it. The Niners don't have to extend that offer, but if they do to either one of these players, they have to sign it. They will come back or at least be on the 90-man training camp roster. And if they get released, it's generally non-guaranteed money, so it wouldn't, hurt their cap at all. So that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, potentially 9 defensive ends that may be on the 90-man roster. Do they need help? Absolutely. And this is a position that I would be shocked if they don't address it in the draft. And I believe they could bring in someone in free agency as well. Again, 11 defensive ends. You got to get to 90, right? You got to get to 90 somehow. And they need to find 5 that they feel good about. And if they feel good about your top 3, and players, we're going to talk about potential cut candidates later, Bosa, Floyd, and Gross-Matos. If they feel good about your top 3, they need 2 more, right? They're not carrying more than 5 defensive ends on the 53-man roster. If they spend a first, second, or third round pick on a DN, that person is guaranteed to make the team. So you're at 4. If you bring in a free agent or an undrafted rookie free agent, somebody, then it's going to be a free-for-all between Beal and the Jacksons, Garvin, Barrett, Sam Okiwanu for that 5th and final spot. Even if you're getting down to DN 4 and 5, you're not going to have an all-pro there. You're not going to have a pro bowler there. You could have a rookie there. You could have a low-cost free agent there for sure. but they're spending a lot of money on their top three. Bosa's cap hit's about 20 million. Floyd's and Yatir Gross-Matos is close to 10 million. So you're spending close to $40 million in 2025 on DNs that are currently on the roster, your top three. But they're going to bring in more. This isn't a strength in numbers thing. Again, you have to get your best five. Find your best five. And if they're happy with their top three, obviously Bosa's not going anywhere, but if they're happy with Bosa, Floyd, and Yatir, you still got to find two more. Now, D tackle, less than half that. You have Malik Collins, Jordan Elliott, Kalia Davis, and Evan Anderson is an exclusive right free agent. Again, there's no harm in tendering him. I think he acquitted himself well. Undrafted rookie free agent, big body. Javon Hargrave is technically on the roster, but he will be released once the new league year starts beginning of March. He'll be designated as a post-June 1st cap cut, and it'll save the Niners a little over $2 million. So 4 defensive tackles on the roster. Again, they're not going to carry more than 5. 10 D linemen is going to be the most. And let's just split it for conversation's sake evenly. 5 DNs, 5 D tackles. Again, I think they're going to draft a D tackle, if not more than one. No more than 2. They're going to draft a D tackle in the first 3 rounds, and they're going to bring in a free agent. So that'll give you 6. And of course, there's going to be undrafted rookie free agents. There's going to be other maybe veteran free agents out there that come in on non-guaranteed deals. They can, just because Collins, Elliott, Kalia Davis, and Evan Anderson are on the roster now, does not mean that they will be on the roster beginning of September at final cutdowns. And I'm going to explain why in a few minutes, but they have work to do at D tackle. Salah being there is going to help. Salah helping to provide some linebacker or safety help, stunts, run blitzes, ways to tighten up the D line and the run defense. Salah's presence, his philosophy, how he's going to teach it, along with defensive lineman Chris Korosek, it's going to be better. I don't know if it's going to make a significant exponential jump into maybe like the top 10, top 7. But they were bottom half of the league. Late teens, early 20s in run defense. That's got to get better. And they can do better personnel-wise. And right off the jump, they're going to be bringing in 2, at least 1 in free agency in March and at least 1 in the draft. Linebackers, 5 under contract: Fred Warner, D. Winters, Tatum Bethune, Deshaun White, who was on the practice squad, signed a future deal, and Jalen Graham is an exclusive right free agent. Again, no harm in tendering him that exclusive rights offer. I'm going to be in a separate podcast. I'll be talking about Dre Greenlaw and if I think he's going to return or not. They could obviously get some improvements here at linebacker. And this is, again, an area where they may not draft somebody early unless someone, someone they consider maybe a top 5 talent falls to them in one of their, say, the 3rd round, one of their 2 third-round picks. I think they have right now 2 or 3 fourth-round picks. If there's someone that they believe could be an instant starter, a day 1 starter, or somebody close, I think they could bring that person in. I think, again, it's a position where they go the route of what they were looking for in someone like a Devondre Campbell, where you can have someone that's a little bit more of a veteran that can step in and play alongside Fred Warner if Greenlaw is not retained. D. Winters, up and down. Tatum Bethune was a rookie. Deshaun White was on the practice squad. And Jalen Graham was with the Niners, was on the practice squad, signed to the Commanders' active roster, was released, signed back to the practice squad for the Niners, then elevated the last couple weeks of the season. I'm not sure if someone like a Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles or Curtis Robinson is going to be back. They are either unrestricted free agents or restricted free agents. And again, I'm going to get into that in a later podcast, but I think there is the opportunity for new players, new blood, whether it's young through the draft and through free agency, to find that right fit for Warner. Again, if Dre Greenlaw does not return. At cornerback, it's Diamador Lenore, who got his extension. Rookie Renardo Green. It's going to be now third-year player Dara Luter, Chase Lucas, and Trey Avery, who was on the practice squad and elevated the last 2 weeks of the season. Again, and I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I can see them dipping into the free agent pool to find their cornerback 3, right? Whether it's someone, and it could be someone like an Isaac Yadam who could potentially come back, like a Rock Sin who could potentially come back. The player that they signed from the Giants practice squad, was it Nick Collins or something close to that? And if it's someone like Nick Collins, that would be more for special teams than a legit cornerback 3. But I can see them going, because they have young corners, a young corner in Green, a young corner in Demo. Luter's his third year. I can see them going to someone a bit more established, a veteran, to bring in, and then a draft pick again. And I know I keep sounding like a broken record, but those are the routes they're going to go. And they're not going to, if it's a draft pick, I could see it being maybe someone in the third, fourth round range. They don't have a fifth round pick unless they trade into that round currently. But I can see a third, fourth, or possibly even waiting as a sixth round pick, someone that they like that can be that, maybe QB or cornerback 4 or 5, help out on special teams if they go into free agency and find someone they like as cornerback number 3. And that's why, and I'm doing mock drafts basically every day. It's a good way to kill, 10, 15 minutes. I know whatever I select is not going to be what the Niners are going to select, but I do it just to have fun with, if they go offensive tackle in round 1 or D tackle or DN, how do the next couple rounds play out in terms of players that may be available? But mock drafts are meaningless because a lot of teams fill a significant number of holes in free agency. Unless teams are truly taking best player available, doing mock drafts right now it's superfluous. It really, doesn't mean anything. I just find it entertaining. So a lot of these holes at, DN, anywhere, DN, D tackle, linebacker, corner, we're going to talk about safety. Not that it's going to be resolved, but they can get their potential starter or a player that's going to play significant time, significant snaps in free agency, and then have that draft player be more of the developmental player. So let's finish it up at safety. Under contract, Malik Mustafa, Jair Brown, George Odom, Jalen Mahoney, and Quindell Johnson, who was, I think, recently signed potentially from the Rams. So 5 safeties on the roster. They're going to go with no more than 4. They've gotten away with 3 a bunch this past season, calling players up from the practice squad. They could use somebody else to challenge Jair Brown. Listen, and this is if Hufanga is going to return. I don't believe he is. But again, I will be going over defensive and offensive free agents, the Niners, and ranking them in terms of how important I believe they are to return to San Francisco. But safety, again, is an area where, maybe they'll have an undrafted rookie free agent safety. Maybe they look at, in my opinion, maybe they look at a veteran safety to come in to start alongside Mustafa since he's still young. Since Jair Brown is still young, he's going to be going into his 3rd year in 2025. George Odom is not a safety, a starter. He's more for special teams, and his position on the roster, I think, is tenuous, given some potential cap savings that I'm going to talk about, in a minute or two. So, work to do at safety, at least in one area, into one spot. And if they're only going to carry 4, that's 25% of the safety spots could be addressed immediately in free agency in March. The Niners have pieces. This is not a totally, in any way, shape, or form, talent-deprived defense. They have premier players at D-end with Bosa, at linebacker with Warner, and at cornerback with Demo. That's 3 of 11 positions, right? A little more than 25% of the defense. And they have a good ascending player in Malik Mustafa. They have starting caliber play, and same with Renardo Green. I should throw them in there. A good ascending player in Green at the other corner. They have starting caliber players basically everywhere else. You can find, 2 of those D tackles that I mentioned could be starters. One of the other DNs, Floyd or Gross Gramatos, could be a starter. Winters could potentially be a starter at linebacker. Linebacker probably is the position that may need the most help. And safety, if they went with Mustafa and Brown, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, but they could get away with that. But I'm sure they will upgrade it. So they have, say, 5, nearly half of their starters, Bosa, Warner, Demo, Mustafa, and Green, that you're going to be penciling in as starters, and others that could be starters, not the end of the world. But that's where they're going to have to do some work. Because if you bump Jordan Elliott from a starter to a rotational player, that's a good thing. Right now, Gross Matos is a rotational player. That's a good thing. Winters, same sort of thing. Maybe he's not ready to be a starter, and either a highly drafted rookie, 3rd or 4th round, or a veteran can come in, same at safety, to push some of those players that are either not quite good enough or not quite ready yet down the roster as depth pieces. People are talking about cuts already. Who can the Niners cut other than Javon Hargrave? And we're only talking defense, guys. Other than Hargrave, because Lynch came out and said that, and they're doing Javon a solid as a veteran. Release him early. Give him a post-June 1st designation to see if he, finds a better fit elsewhere. And Kyle and John did come out and say, we'll try to re-sign him to something cheaper, but I just don't imagine that happening. But in terms of players that could be cut post June 1st, guys, there is, and I'm mentioning players, I'm giving their post June 1st cap savings because it's always significantly more than before June 1st. But here's why I'm saying no rush. The Niners still have to get to 90 players. Post June 1st means anytime essentially before the start of the season or in a lot of cases going into the season. And who knows what's going to happen training camp, who can turn an ankle, tear an ACL, tear a hamstring, right? During the preseason, during preseason games, injuries don't only happen during the season. And this is the Niners we're talking about. People can get injured at any point. But if they want to cut someone like Leonard Floyd post June 1st, after June 1st, they save $8.4 million. Yetur Gross-Matos after June 1st, $7.8 million. These are all after June 1st. So I'm not going to keep saying it. But at D tackle, Malik Collins, $3.4 million. Jordan Elliott, $2.9 million. So if they find players that are performing better, that they found in the draft or in free agency, and you're going through camp battles and you're seeing that these new players that you brought in are performing better than the players that you had on the roster last year, Floyd, Yetur, Collins, Elliott, those are your savings. George Odom at safety, even though he's been a core special teams player and the special teams have been bad, we're going to talk special teams higher in a minute, you can save $2.6 million. Again, if you find a safety that's better, that could also play special teams in the draft or free agency, $2.6 million in savings. Drake Jackson coming off of his patellar tendon rehab, $1.5 million in savings. Jair Brown, I don't think they're going to give up on him, but if they do, $1.2 million. Kalia Davis at D tackle, a little over $1 million. And Dowler Luter at cornerback, $1 million. But again, guys, no rush. There's absolutely no rush to cut any players because you don't know who you draft or who you bring in when they start putting the pads on, if they're performing better than any of these players that I mentioned here. And if they are better and they bump these players down to positional depth, not a bad thing. Not a bad thing, but something like D-end, are you going to pay, Yetur Gross-Matos $7.8 million to be your D-end 4? That's a lot. Would you pay Malik Collins or Jordan Elliott, or you can save $3 million on Collins or Elliott if they're going to be your D tackle 4 because they got bumped down by 2 different players? Same with George Odom, a little over $2.5 million that could be saved. So a lot of financials that need to be worked out and cap management, especially with Brock getting paid, and Brock's going to be getting in the mid 50s or higher in terms of average annual value. And hopefully they sign Brock soon. I would love to say before the league year starts, so sometime before the first week of March, so they know who they can start re-signing. They can start re-signing any of their own free agents now. They can, but Brock is the biggest, most expensive domino to fall. So getting him signed sooner than later would only be beneficial. But any of the free agents otherwise that the Niners have are not really big ticket items other than a Greenlaw or Hufanga. And their fates with San Francisco are completely up in the air in terms of what their market may be and if it's going to put San Francisco out of the bidding for their services for 2026 and beyond. Now, quickly, let's talk about special teams. Niners signed former Jets special team coordinator Brant Boyer, who probably got a recommendation from Robert Saleh. He was with the Jets from 2016, so he was with them for eight or nine seasons, survived multiple coaching regimes, so obviously he was doing something right. And during his time with the Jets, at least from 2019 to 2023, so the last half, they were a top 5 unit per DVOA. They slipped significantly back last year to 29th. Well, they were dealing with some injuries on their special teams unit, the way the Niners were across the board. In terms of special teams rated by expected points allowed or lost, the Niners had the second worst special teams unit from 2016 to this past year, 31st. The Jets during that time, 19th. So nothing huge to write home about. They weren't, like the Seahawks or the Ravens or the Chiefs or the Raiders, like a top 5 unit in terms of points gained or points lost. But in the past 3 seasons, if you want to dive a little bit deeper, from 2022 to 2024, the Jets were plus 19.9 expected points gained, whereas the Niners during those 3 seasons were negative 73 points lost. We all know the special teams have been an issue for the past handful of years. Do we think Brant Boyer is going to be the absolute solve? Maybe. I'm not expecting a top 7, top 10 special teams unit. But let's just not be bottom 3, bottom 7, whatever they've been the past handful of years. Give me top half of the league, right? If he can continue to work with Jacob Cowing as the punt returner, if they're going to get Debo or Guerendo or Cowing or other players involved in kickoff returns. And again, the kick returner is almost a wash of a position, just given the number of touchbacks they're going to be, which maybe puts Debo in the running a little bit more, since he may only be asked to return, 2, maybe 3 kicks at the most each game. And we've seen the past couple of years what Debo can do with the ball in his hands. A couple times, penalties bringing it back a significant amount, but Debo obviously dangerous and is an option as a kick returner. Boyer is going to have some decisions to make with the kicking specialists they currently have. So Jake Moody, if cut after June 1st, saves $1.2 million on the cap. Obviously, he's a rookie. They're going to be a minuscule cap hit. I think he is emotionally broken. I think he would serve better from a change of scenery. And I think if Boyer wants to come in here and put his stamp on the team, I don't think Moody is part of it. And the only mystery that remains is he cut before training camp or sometime after? And you can say the same about Mitch Wishnowsky. He's older, early 30s, could save $2.5 million if he's cut after June 1st, been dealing with back issues. They could definitely go cheaper at punter and maybe save, when it's all said and done, $500,000, maybe $1 million, especially if they go the rookie route. And I'm not opposed to drafting a rookie, but just don't spend more than a 6th or 7th round pick on it, or an undrafted rookie free agent, or if there's a cheap veteran option at either kicker or punter you can bring in. Hold your tryouts, hold your competition starting in training camp. Bring in 2 additional kickers. Say it's 1 free agent, 1 draft. Bring in 2 additional punters, and may the best, most consistent man win. Now, the problem with that, at least for Nick Moody, is Nick Moody performs well in practice and just chokes out during games, which is why I just think no matter how it shakes out, I don't think you can bring Jake Moody back. But at least with these 2 coaching hires, Robert Saleh and Brant Boyer, on paper, logically, seems like instant upgrades for this team. one of the biggest question marks or albatrosses, if that's the possessive of plural of albatross, is the injury bug, right? Is this a team that can stay healthier or significantly healthier than they were this past year? Then between Kyle and Salah and Boyer, this should be across the board a better team with draft picks coming in, with free agents coming in, free agents they're going to re-sign, and a fourth place schedule. This should be a better, much, much better team than what we saw this past year. We'll see. And we have no idea who's going to be on the roster yet. So I'm not going to, obviously we can't make any predictions. Oh, well, given all that, and they should have a good draft and good free agent class, and they'll be back to winning the West and being 11-6 or 12-5. We don't know that yet. We have no idea what the Rams are going to do, or the Cardinals, or the Seahawks, right? It's a favorable schedule, but it's also a favorable schedule for the entire NFC West because you play probably the two weakest divisions in the league, the AFC and NFC Souths. Not really chock full of good teams there, but at least for what the defense is looking like, Salah is back. He's got pieces to work with. There are pieces that need to be brought in for sure and some depth. But I think even though we are only, one NFL game left, and obviously there's the Pro Bowl games as well, and nothing happening until August, it's an exciting time, at least to me, to be a 49er fan because this season's over. We don't have to think about that anymore. They nailed their D coordinator hire, their special teams hire, obviously seems to be trending in the right direction versus where they were. And I am curious and excited to see what this roster starts to look like. And we'll even say in the coming weeks, as they potentially start to tender and re-sign some of their own before free agency hits in the beginning of March. But that'll conclude the podcast for today and this week. Like always, I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to make us part of your listening routine. Got time to think about the Super Bowl matchup and maybe discuss a little bit more in detail, potentially next podcast. But no matter what, guys, I know it's a matchup that a lot of people are not excited over. Basically anybody but these two teams. Not because they ran it back, from 2 years ago, because if that's the case, then we can't be hypocrites. Then I'm sure a lot of people weren't thrilled about another Niner Chiefs Super Bowl last year since they saw that in 2019. But we're going to see history no matter how it shakes out, right? It's either going to be the Chiefs getting a three-peat or the Eagles preventing a three-peat. And it just becomes as a Niner fan, do you want the Chiefs to get that since the Niners couldn't when they went back-to-back in 89 and 90? Or do you root for the Chiefs because the Eagles are just such a detestable organization and fan base with players and Nick Sirianni having such a punchable face? We're all just hoping for a good game. I guess there's really a no-win situation as a Niner fan or maybe as a fan in general, but at least it's football, Super Bowl, last game of the year, something to watch. I'm sure I'll talk about that more next podcast. But again, thank you so much for watching and listening. I appreciate it. Whatever you're doing between now and we talk again, which will probably be midweek next week, probably a Wednesday podcast, unless something significant happens, like Dre Greenlaw re-signing or Hufanga or something, some sort of shakeup in Ninerland. We'll talk again next Wednesday and recap everything that's happened between now and then. Stay happy, healthy, and safe. Talk soon. Take care.